Hi folks, welcome to another episode of Trek Actually, only not really, more like a not actually Trek Actually, because I didn't put as much effort into this one as I put into the last one, the last couple of them actually. But I did put more effort into this one than I usually do to a not actually Trek Actually, because while this video, as will rapidly become apparent to you, has not been scripted, I did write some notes for it, because in this video, I am going to discuss what is obviously the hot button topic in the Trek fandom community at the moment. The Star Trek related topic that we're all dying to discuss and hear people on YouTube talk about. And that, of course, the Star Trek series of the moment, Enterprise. Because that's why it's funny, because it wasn't the right answer. No, I'm gonna do that thing that I did last year, I guess, a little while ago, when I did a video where I pitched a rewrite of the last episode of Star Trek Voyager. I'm gonna do that for Star Trek Enterprise. A couple weeks ago, I did a Trek Actually video about why I think the last episode of Star Trek Enterprise was not so great. And so now I'm going to offer my own ideas for what I would have done instead. If I could go back in time and get the job to write the series finale of Star Trek Enterprise, what would I have done different than what they actually did? How would my ideal perfect world finale of Star Trek Enterprise be different from These Are the Voyages? Before I go into what my ideas for that episode are, just a couple of ground rules. I am not going to change anything but the final episode. So everything else that happened in Enterprise up to the last episode is going to remain unchanged in my headcanon here, in my hypothetical, in my concept. The challenge for this, for me, is not to redo the entire show, because if I were going to redo the entire show, the first thing I would do is change the opening title theme from that Russell Watson cover of that Diane Warren song to the song Wherever You Will Go by The Calling, which obviously should have been the opening theme of Enterprise. The other thing I want to say is I'm a big fan of natural endpoints for stories, and especially when it comes to writing a finale of a series. I'm a big, big fan of natural endpoints. And what does that mean? That means ending the story at a turning point in the characters' lives. So it feels natural to leave them at that point, to end our following of their adventures at that point. And a natural endpoint could be a birth, a death, a wedding, a funeral, someone gets promoted, someone gets fired, someone retires. If you're following students, maybe they graduate, or they get their first job, or they transfer someplace. It's a natural endpoint. What are some natural endpoints potentially for Enterprise? Well, the ship could be destroyed or decommissioned. Captain Archer could be promoted or reassigned. We could depict the founding of the Federation, or some precursor of the founding of the Federation. We could see the breakup of the main crew. Any of those, all of those, some combination of those would all be very good natural endpoints for the show. And some of those they actually did do, or attempt to do, in the last episode of Enterprise that we actually got. And I will make use of one or two of those in my pitch. Finally, my idea for a rewritten Enterprise finale treats it as more of an epilogue to the series than a final episode that tries to tie everything together and wrap up all the remaining story threads. And that's because they already had an episode like that. The second to last episode of the series, Terra Prime, functions pretty well as a final episode. That's why I think Manny Coto, one of the producers, who was, I believe, the showrunner of Enterprise in its final season, he has said in the past that he considers Terra Prime, the second to last episode, to be the proper series finale of Enterprise. And then the episode that came after that, These Are the Voyages, he considers more of a coda. And that's kind of the approach I'm taking as well for my pitch for for my alternate finale. And this, as with the Voyager video, this will not be a fully fleshed out, beat-for-beat story. This is more of a pitch. This is more of a set of ideas of what I would do. What I have here is basically a premise and a collection of proposed scenes for the episode, leading to what I think would have been a really great ending, a really great final scene, final shot, if we could get to that point to close out the series. So the title for my proposed alternate finale that would replace These Are the Voyages as the finale of Enterprise, it would be called simply Space. So the premise is that Enterprise is still in Earth orbit following the events of the two-parter that took place right before the last episode, which was the first part was Demons, and then the second part was Terra Prime. After those events, Enterprise is still in orbit around Earth. They're still home. And encouraged by the recent talks between humans and Vulcans and Andorians and Tellarites to form a coalition of planets, which we saw in the previous two episodes, Starfleet has begun preparing 2 new NX-class starships for launch. And we have heard these starships mentioned before in a previous episode and previous season. I think actually Archer mentioned that, because of course there's the NX-01, which is Enterprise, the NX-02, which is the Columbia. And after, I think in the episode where they introduce the Columbia, or they first start talking about the Columbia being launched or about to be launched, Archer mentions that there are also 2 additional NX-class ships that are on the drawing board or are being prepared for construction or launch or whatever. And then we never really heard about those anymore. So for my finale, we hear about the next 2 NX-class starships that are both being readied for launch, and those would be the NX-03, christened the Challenger, and the NX-04, christened the Discovery, to follow with the naming pattern of the American space shuttles. Starfleet wants to promote some members of the Enterprise crew to captain these new ships. So they approach T'Pol and Trip, and they want them to be the captains of Challenger and Discovery, respectively. And they also approach Archer following his little speech to the delegates at the end of Terra Prime, where he talks about, let's explore the final frontier together as allies, when he's talking to the representatives of the other planets. They come to Archer and they want to promote him as well. They want to promote him to Admiral and to give him essentially Admiral Forrest's old position as the head of the NX program, and moving forward as the officer responsible for developing new starships and guiding the future of Starfleet as they continue the NX program and then grow beyond that. So now here are that's just the general premise of the episode. So that's where we sort of start, and some ideas for scenes in this episode in space. So Archer initially is a little reluctant to accept promotion, but he has a meeting with Ambassador Saval. And Ambassador Saval kind of talks him into it. And he says to Archer, I have observed that legacy is of great importance to humans. I know it to be of great importance to you, Jonathan. The legacy of your father, the legacy of Zephram Cochrane. For the last 4 years, you have continued those legacies from the bridge of Enterprise, but their impact on the destiny of both our peoples goes beyond a warp engine, beyond a starship. Cochrane made his greatest contribution to history not in space, but right here on Earth, when he reached out his hand to a Vulcan captain. That's a worthy legacy as well, and I cannot think of anyone better suited to carry it forward than you. And that convinces Archer to accept promotion and take on this new challenge and become the head of the NX program. So T'Pol and Trip are going to meet Archer for dinner at some point later, and Archer isn't there yet, so before he shows up, the two of them are talking, and they've recently, of course, gone through the death of their daughter, or their sort of daughter, the child that was cloned from the combination of their DNA, Elizabeth, who tragically died in the Terra Prime episode right before. And because of that recent trauma, T'Pol wonders if maybe they would be better off if they just spent some time apart for a while. And Trip makes the exact opposite argument and says, no, we shouldn't be apart. We should stay together, and we should stay with the rest of our family. And by family, Trip means the rest of the crew of Enterprise. They should take solace in their friends and their surrogate family aboard the ship. And at this point, Archer shows up, and he has overheard the end of this conversation. And he says, well, if it makes your decision any easier, there are going to be some changes in the living arrangements of the family, regardless of what you two decide to do, because I have accepted promotion and now I'm going to stay here on Earth and head up the NX program. Archer offers T'Pol command of the Challenger, and then he offers Trip another job on Earth. Maybe he offers Trip to come work with him at the NX program and work on new engine development or some kind of engineering position. And Trip isn't too crazy about that. And then he says, hey, aren't they making a fourth NX class ship? Sort of implying like, maybe, give me command of that. And Archer will kind of smile at him and go, I see what you did there. So then Trip would be offered command of the Discovery, of the fourth NX class starship. So T'Pol and Trip both accept their promotions. They're both going to become captains. They're going to captain new ships in the NX class program. And then after that, we're back aboard Enterprise, and Trip finds Lieutenant Reed, Malcolm. And he tells Reed about his promotion, and he offers Reed the position to be his first officer aboard the Discovery. And that comes, of course, with a rank promotion. He would go from lieutenant to lieutenant commander. And Reed, remembering his sort of troubled history with Trip, how they didn't get along at first, but eventually they got to become friends. He says, are you sure that you want us to serve on another starship together? And Trip says, Malcolm, if I've learned anything these last few years, it's that big chair on the bridge is about the most dangerous place to sit in the galaxy. And if I'm going to sit there, I can't think of anyone I'd rather have watching my back. And Reed agrees. He says, yes, there is no one else you should rather have watching your back. And he accepts. So now we have Trip taking command of the Discovery, and Reed getting promoted and transferring onto the Discovery as his first officer. So next we have a scene where Archer meets with Hoshi. And she's heard about his promotion, and she's, all congratulations, good for you, you deserve it. And he has an offer for her. And the offer he has for Hoshi is for her to accept promotion and be transferred to the Columbia and become the first officer of the Columbia. And Hoshi says, well, Captain Hernandez already has a first officer. And Archer at this point, all Archer says is, well, she's going to need a new one. But Hoshi has another problem with this. She says she's not sure if she's ready for the responsibility, for one thing, but Archer says, oh, yes, you can do this. I have all the confidence in the world. You've been such an asset to our crew over the last 4 years, and you are ready to take this step. And she says, yeah, but, I'm still an ensign. Can an ensign be a first officer? And Archer says, no, but a lieutenant commander can. And she says, can you be promoted straight from ensign to lieutenant commander? And Archer just kind of shrugs, and he's like, well, Admiralty has its privileges. I'm going to be an admiral now. I can promote you if I want to. So Hoshi is still a bit uncertain, a bit overwhelmed, but she has faith in Archer's faith in her. So she accepts. She says, yes, I will accept your offer. I will accept promotion. And I will become the new first officer of the Columbia, the NX-02. Then Archer finds Travis Mayweather. And this is one of the scenes that I really have a strong sense of, that I really, if this were to get written and get made as a show, this is the one scene that I would have to absolutely make sure that we did, more or less as I have it written here. Because next, Archer goes to find Travis Mayweather. And Travis, since they're on Earth, Travis has taken the opportunity to visit the Smithsonian's Udvar Hazy Center, which is in Chantilly, Virginia, about half an hour or so outside of Washington, D.C. And that is the auxiliary site of the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum, where they keep a lot of historic aircraft and spacecraft that they can't fit inside the Air and Space Museum that's actually in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall. And of course, in Star Trek First Contact, Captain Picard mentions that in the 24th century, Zefram Cochrane's original warp ship, the Phoenix, is in the Smithsonian. And I thought, well, it would probably not be in the Smithsonian that is on the National Mall, because there wouldn't be enough room. So it would be at an auxiliary site. And since the real-life auxiliary site of the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum is called the Udvar-Hazy Center, we'll just say that it's there. We can future it up. Imagine what the Udvar-Hazy Center would look like in the 22nd century. And that's where Travis is, and he is there to visit, of course, the Phoenix, Cochrane's original warp ship. And we can also catch a glimpse of the Space Shuttle Enterprise that will be on display somewhere in the background for a neat little Easter egg for the fans. And Travis is there visiting the Phoenix, and Archer finds him. And Travis says, I wish I knew what it was like to fly that ship, to fly the Phoenix. And Archer says, well, I don't suppose anybody really knows what that felt like except for Zephram Cochrane and his co-pilots. And at this point, I want to take a shot of a photograph that is part of the Phoenix exhibit, and it would be a photograph of Zephram Cochrane and his co-pilots that flew with him on that historic first warp flight in the Phoenix. And of course, the co-pilots would be Commander Riker and Geordi LaForge. And if we could either find like an on-set photo of the three of them in that cockpit set smiling, or just do a realistic looking mock-up of the three of them smiling for the camera while they're aboard the Phoenix, either right before or right after they take their historic flight, I would love to throw that in there as well. And that way we could still, in a way, we could sneak Jonathan Frakes in there, and he could still have sort of a cameo in the last episode without doing the holodeck thing and ruining the whole show. So we do that, and then Archer says, he says only Cochrane and his co-pilots know what it felt like to fly the Phoenix. But then again, not very many people know what it feels like to pilot a starship at Warp 5. You're one of the few people that knows what that feels like. And then he changes the subject from the Phoenix to Enterprise. And he says, Travis, with a new captain coming aboard, with me being promoted, and most of the rest of the senior staff that has been aboard Enterprise for all these years, moving on to other assignments, it sure would be nice to have a member of our crew stay aboard the ship as someone who knows Enterprise and knows how she works and knows what she can do, what she's capable of. And Travis, I would love for that officer to be you. And Archer offers to promote Mayweather to first officer of Enterprise under the incoming new captain. Mayweather says, promotion from ensign directly to lieutenant commander? Has that ever happened before? And Archer says, yes, about an hour ago when I promoted Hoshi to first officer of the Columbia. And Travis accepts. And Archer says, you're the right man for the job. Your experience is going to serve the ship and the new captain well, because you know Enterprise better than anyone else who is staying aboard from the old crew. And Travis says, well, maybe anybody else other than Chef. And Archer says, well, yeah, I offered the job to Chef first, but he wasn't interested. And they have a little laugh together. Next scene is the Enterprise crew meets aboard Enterprise together one last time. They have a last meal together in the ship's mess, and everybody's there. And Archer wishes everyone luck on their new assignments. And we also learn at this point that Dr. Phlox will also be leaving the ship. He will be joining the crew of Challenger under Captain T'Pol, and also that Commander Kelby from Engineering, who briefly took over for Trip when he was briefly transferred to Columbia. Commander Kelby will be leaving Enterprise as well, and he will be T'Pol's first officer aboard Challenger. And Archer says, Starfleet is expanding, the fleet is growing, and I know that it'll be in good hands because it's going to be in your hands. And while you served under me aboard Enterprise, you were the finest crew that any captain could have ever asked for. We have this nice sort of parting moment between captain and crew as Archer is about to be promoted and leave the ship, and they're all about to go their separate ways. And then after dinner, Archer is on the bridge one last time, and nobody else is really on the ship because the ship is still in orbit and it doesn't really need to be fully crewed at all times. And Archer is on the bridge of Enterprise, and T'Pol shows up, and then Archer and T'Pol can have their final scene together where they make a little bit of small talk. And then Archer says to her, what I said earlier about the crew, I hope you know that all goes double for you. And when you were assigned as my first officer 4 years ago, there wasn't anyone I wanted on my ship less than an officer in the Vulcan High Command looking over my shoulder. But now I can't imagine a better first officer, a better commander, and a better friend than you. So then we go back to Earth, and we see the promotion ceremony, and Archer gets promoted to Admiral, T'Pol and Trip get promoted to Captain, Hoshi and Travis get promoted to Lieutenant Commander, and everybody's now officially on their way to their new assignments. We have a scene of Trip and T'Pol at a spaceport, seeing Archer, Travis, and Hoshi off as they board a shuttle pod to go back up to space, which Travis is piloting, of course. And then after Archer, Travis, and Hoshi leave, it's just Trip and T'Pol left back on Earth. And Trip turns to T'Pol and he says, "Hey, do you have any plans for tomorrow?" And T'Pol says, "Well, if the Challenger and the Discovery are to launch as scheduled this summer, then I expect that we will both have plans for the next several months at least." And Tucker's like, "Yeah, that's true, but do you think you might be able to carve out an hour tomorrow for lunch?" And T'Pol says, "Let's make it breakfast, because I've already agreed to have lunch with Commander Kelby tomorrow." And Trip says, "Well, the thing is, I've already agreed to have breakfast with Malcolm tomorrow." And T'Pol says, "Then I suppose it will have to be dinner." And Trip says, "I suppose so." And that's where we leave Trip and T'Pol. So now we're back aboard Enterprise, and Enterprise is underway now. It has left Earth orbit. It is flying through space to rendezvous with Columbia. And as we see the ship rendezvousing or flying to meet Columbia, and a montage of some other stuff of Archer and Hoshi and maybe some other crew members doing some things aboard the ship, we hear the voiceover of Archer's final captain's log, and it goes a little something like this. Captain Star Log, concluding entry: "We are en route to rendezvous with Columbia." I feel like I've already given more than enough speeches these last couple of weeks, so as I close out my time as commander of this vessel, let me just say this. Serving as the captain of this ship with this crew has been and will always be the greatest honor of my life. We've done our best to meet the challenge left for us by Zephram Cochrane, to explore, to seek out, to boldly go. Now I realize that our greatest mission, the one all of us have been assigned to all our lives, is to explore not only space, but the greatest uncharted territory there is, the future. I don't know what's in store for any of us there, but I can't wait to see it for myself. I guess that was a little speechy after all, and he gives a little bit of a chuckle, and he ends his final log as captain of the Enterprise. So then Enterprise and Columbia meet up and they dock, and Archer is on the bridge in the captain's chair, and Hoshi, after the docking procedure is completed with Columbia, Hoshi is like, "Well, that's my ride, gotta go," and she departs Enterprise to take up her new post as first officer aboard Columbia. Archer says, "Good luck, Lieutenant Commander, keep in touch." After Hoshi's gone, Mayweather, who is now Lieutenant Commander Mayweather, and who is still serving at the post of helmsman, even though he is also first officer, because Spock was science officer and first officer, and T'Pol was science officer, and also first officer. So we have the notion in these early days of Starfleet that the first officer isn't a post unto itself, that the first officer also has some other duty on the ship. So Travis will continue to pilot the ship as well as be the first officer, kind of like how number one is stationed at one of the forward stations in during Captain Pike's era on that Enterprise. So Travis will still be at the helm, but he'll also be the first officer aboard the ship. And Mayweather turns around to face Archer, and he sees him still sitting in the captain's chair, and he says, "You're not giving up the chair to the last second, are you, sir?" And Archer says, "Part of me still wonders if I'm making a terrible mistake to give it up at all." And then Travis gets a little more serious, and he looks at Archer, and he says, "We'll take care of her, sir." And Archer smiles, and he says, "I know you will." And then one of the other crew members, informs Archer that Lieutenant Commander Sato has disembarked and Captain Fletcher is on board. And Archer says, okay, disengage from Columbia, get ready to get underway. And then the doors to the bridge open, and the new captain of Enterprise, Veronica Fletcher, comes aboard the bridge for the first time. And Veronica Fletcher, if you've read the novels, I took that name from the novels. It's a little bit of a cheat because the novels hadn't been written at the time that this episode would have been produced, but I wanted the new captain to be a woman, and I wanted it to be the first officer of Columbia. And it turns out that it worked out because in the novels, the first officer of Columbia under Captain Hernandez is a woman named Veronica Fletcher. So I took that name and I just imagined her being promoted to succeed Archer as captain of Enterprise. And she comes out and introduces herself, Veronica Fletcher, reporting for duty, Admiral. And Archer gets up out of the captain's chair finally. And she says, it's an honor and a privilege to succeed you, sir. And he kind of demurs and says, well, if you're as good at this job as you were at being Captain Hernandez's first officer aboard the Columbia, then you're going to do just fine. And then he says, speaking of which, and he turns and he introduces her to her new first officer, which is Travis, and they meet each other for the first time. And then Archer finally stands aside and he waves to the captain's chair and he says, she's all yours, Captain. And then as Archer exits the bridge, we see Captain Fletcher standing in front of the captain's chair, and she says, well, Commander Mayweather, shall we get underway? And he responds, yes, sir, and turns back around to face the view screen. And Captain Fletcher takes her seat. She sits down for the first time in the captain's chair. Archer is watching from the doorway. And as he sees her sit in the captain's chair, he pushes the button and shuts the door. And we see the door slide shut in front of his face. And that is our final shot of the interior of Enterprise. We cut from there and Archer sort of smiling, seeing the changing of the guard. Door shuts in front of him. We cut exterior to space as Enterprise jumps to warp to continue her adventure. And that's my proposed ending, my alternate ending for Enterprise. Now, as I said, that's just a very general pitch. It's very much an epilogue. There's not a lot of plot in it. It's a series of scenes, and even if we approach it as that and say we're just going to write it as that, it would still need some connective tissue to sort of fill everything out and to make it feel cohesive. So those of you who have been watching, if you have any ideas, any proposals for what we could add to this to make it more of a cohesive story, I would love to hear what all of you have to say about that. I would love to know what you think about my idea of a final shot, of a final ending, of the changing of the guard of Enterprise. Because I thought, I'm trying to think of natural endpoints. I'm trying to think, as I did with Voyager, what's this show about? If you boil this show down, what is the essence of this show? And to me, I thought it would have been a very fitting ending for Enterprise if we take the show that is about the first captain of Enterprise, the first captain of the first Enterprise, and we end the series by seeing that first captain, Jonathan Archer, hand off his command to the second captain. So throughout the show, we've seen the first captain, and right at the end, we introduce the second captain of Enterprise, and she will go off and have adventures that we will not get to see, but we will know that is the next step. After Archer comes the next captain. And we get to see the other members of the crew get promoted and move on to other things. And because I threw that in there and I made that a big part of it because that's something that annoyed me about the way the cast in Next Generation was handled, and to a lesser extent the way the cast in the original series was handled too, is that nobody ever gets promoted. Nobody ever moves on to anything. Everybody's just sort of frozen in amber. The original crew gets to move around a little bit when we join, especially at the beginning of Star Trek II. You see that Chekhov is serving somewhere else. You see that Kirk is an admiral and Spock is the captain of the Enterprise. People have moved on or moved around a little bit, but they come back together eventually. And then in Star Trek VI, of course, you see that Sulu is finally promoted and given command of his own ship. So there's some sense that time moves on and that people aren't at the same job for the rest of their lives. Whereas in Next Gen, it's like everybody's frozen right where they were at the end of the series. Even Worf, who leaves to Deep Space Nine and then keeps coming back and just gets right back to his old job. So nobody goes anywhere. And I thought, what a lost opportunity for those movies to move those characters forward, or at least to move them around a little bit and make it a little more interesting. So for my episode, for the last episode of Enterprise, that's one of the things I would most want to do. I would want to say, okay, their mission together is over, and now they are moving on to other things, and they have been promoted. Their accomplishments have been recognized and rewarded in a tangible way. And they have higher ranks and better assignments, and so it's good news. It's happy for them because, you know, they've been rewarded for their hard work, and they've been given new challenges to pursue. But it's also sad because they're splitting up, because they will no longer be serving together. You know, time has moved on in both good and bad ways, and I just think that's also a nice natural end point, and it makes it feel like a finale. It feels like, okay, this is a good place to step away from these characters, you know? So that's what I decided to do for my alternate pitch for a series finale for Enterprise. Let me know what you think. If you like my ideas, if you think my ideas are dog shit and you have much better ideas, I would love to hear whatever you have to say. I also want to remind you, last week, I did a video called Excavating Relics that was a part of Captain Picard Day, which is a project among several of us Star Trek YouTubers that was conceived by the wonderful and terrific Jesse Gender in response to the debut of the Star Trek Picard series that debuted last week. And since everybody wants to know what I thought of it, I thought the first episode was great. I'm not going to do episode by episode reviews, but I thought the first episode was fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of it. But we all got together and did videos about Captain Picard, and mine went up last week. And if you didn't see that, you can go back and watch it. And the link to the playlist with all of the Captain Picard Day videos that all of us did on all of our various channels is in the description of this video as well. So go watch everybody else's videos as well and see what everybody else had to say about Captain Picard and what he has meant to them and what their favorite episodes or moments dealing with Picard have been over the years. Check that out. Don't forget to listen to the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I co-host with the wonderful, brilliant, hilarious, much better than me in all ways, Jason Harding, who and we're closing in on the end of our second season of the Ensign's Log, and it's been a ton of fun. So if you haven't listened to that yet, now's a really great time to check it out, and I hope you enjoy it if you enjoy my other Star Trek themed stuff. And that's it for this episode of Trek Actually / Not Actually Trek Actually. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next regulation episode of Trek Actually, which will be all about 7 of 9 and why she wound up being more than just eye candy. And until then, take care, everybody. I'll see you.